record right now. All right, whenever you're ready.
All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get started then. Hi, everybody. My name is John Chan. I am an engineering manager at Stack Overflow. If you are a programmer, I hope that you're familiar with that. If you're not a programmer, not familiar with Stack Overflow, it is the world's largest developer community that's out there. You may know it for its question and answer product. And I've been with that company for about 7 years. And today we're going to be talking about landing your first tech job. So this is going to be largely focused on engineering folks, but hopefully this should be for useful for anybody that is thinking about getting into the tech industry or possibly looking for a new opportunity, even if you've been in it for a little bit of time. So I'm going to share some slides. This is a version of a talk that I give pretty often, I'd say. And it's a pretty small group, so I'm going to try to get through as much of this content as I can. It's a lot that's in here, but would love to leave as much time for discussion as possible. So I'm going to share my screen. Ooh. Oh, looks like there is a screen sharing disabled by the host here. Can we enable that?
Yes, I can make you a co-host.
Okay, cool.
So let me know.
All right, yeah, I can see it now. All right, great.
Okay, cool.
Let me put this up over here and get this going. One sec, present, share screen, and I'm going to share this one. All right, can folks see this all right? Okay, yep. Great. So your first tech job, things I wish I knew. Let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit more about me. I know I gave my introduction a little bit beforehand, but just again, I am an engineering manager at Stack Overflow. I lead the engineering team for the Stack Overflow public site, including its popular Q&A product. And I've been there for about 7 years. So about 2 years after I left NYU. I'm also the founder of a site called Bento, which is at bento.io. And this is actually how I got my job at Stack Overflow. But it's basically a site where I curate all the best learning resources to learn how to code. I just really want to make it easier for people who are self-taught developers like myself to actually get the skills that they need. So I think a lot about how to bring as much technology education and opportunity to as many folks as possible. A few other things, just a shout out, I'm also the founder of Out in Tech U, which is an organization within a larger nonprofit known as Out in Tech, which is the largest LGBTQ technology sort of like organization that's out there. I do a lot of work helping LGBTQ youth get their first technology opportunity with mentorship, very similar to what we're doing here with NYU and Tech at NYU, excuse me. And we've had over almost 1,000 people go through that program in the last 3 years or so. And last thing here is that I'm a self-taught developer. I didn't go to school for computer science. I mostly learned because of MySpace and Zynga and playing around with JavaScript and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but let's get into what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing that I want to get into before you even talk about like interviews and, like what you put on a resume, I want to talk about what you want to be doing to get ready before you even start with your job search. A lot of the things that you're doing even before you step into, sending in your first resume or having a phone screen is going to be really important for you to position yourself in a way. And also a lot of things that I think are important for you to know when you're starting your search. So the first thing I think is that, understanding what kind of company you want to get into and also an understanding of what the market is sort of like right now. So I think the most important thing to understand about what it's like being a developer or just somebody that's in tech is that you're in demand. There are not enough programmers in the world to fill all the jobs. At Stack Overflow, we do this big survey every single year where we find out, what are people looking for inside of a job? We also have a job board that's there as well. And, the last time that we checked, there's about 1 programmer for every 5 jobs that are out there. It's a candidate's market. So I'm going to be referring to this a lot because it really informs, I think, a lot of what you're going to be seeing, throughout the entire recruiting process. So the first thing you need to remember is that you're in demand. They need you more than you need them. And that's something really important to remember here. And the next thing to remember, because of the candidates market, I really want you to start thinking about what you want out of an opportunity and less about what you think you're qualified for. right? So don't think about your abilities and then look for jobs. I think that's the way that a lot of people intuitively think about this. Think about what your 10 dream companies might be, right? Like this is something I'm doing with my mentee right now. And then see what your opportunities are out there when it comes to those companies, right? So it's going to be a lot more like gardening, really, than actually just trying to like pray and spray what your applications are. Think about what are the 10 companies you really want to work for that you would sort of like go join at the drop of a hat, and then see what opportunities are there. The other thing, and this is especially the case for folks that are just starting off their careers, really you want to be maximizing for learning, right? You're going to be working, retirement age is what, like 65, and you're probably not even 20 years old. That is almost 45 years of working, right? You're going to have a lot of chances to be making money or joining a prestigious place, but really the thing that you are doing right now is investing in yourself. And the thing to be thinking about is how can you maximize what you're going to be learning in your early sort of experiences here? So think about what that is, right? Of course, get enough so that you're getting a paycheck, be happy with that, maybe a cool brand, but really think a lot about this as investing in yourself. And the last thing that I want to talk about this when it comes to picking a company is that I think that there's a pretty good sweet spot, especially for the folks that I think are in this particular group. There's sort of two dimensions I like to think about this in terms of. First is sort of like engineering culture, and the second is sort of like the size of a company. And if you sort of think about where the sweet spot there might be, I don't like being sort of like a cog in a machine. You want to be somewhere where you have a little bit of autonomy, have a place where you can grow at, so somewhere mid-stage or a little bit more established is what I like. And then also when you're thinking about the engineering culture, you really want to be in a place that has an incredible engineering culture and not necessarily some place that is just, having developers churn out widgets inside of a factory. So if you think about, where, a financial institution might be, right? Maybe not as strong of an engineering culture, but very established. So like a JP Morgan or a Citibank or something like that. But, contrast that with, say, a Google or a Facebook where there's a strong engineering culture, but just as established. You can sort of go down that size range and sort of go to the startup stages. Like I really love solid brands that you recognize that are growing, right? So mid-stage startup is where I really like to be, and that's where I've been when it comes to Stack Overflow. Okay, so say that you're coming up with what your list of companies that you want to join are, right? What are the things that you might want to look out for when deciding those things? I already mentioned a little bit about size, engineering culture, all that stuff, but these are actually 4 things that I sort of look for whenever I'm looking at different companies and evaluating them. The first is people, right? That I'm around smart people. You're guaranteed to learn this way. I think it's incredibly important who you're going to be spending day in and day out with. If you think about all the hours that you're spending at work, you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, so you better like them and hope that you learn a lot from them and they're a joy to work with, right? The second thing is just autonomy, right? This is really about, how much you get to explore and try new things and how much control you have over your career path, as well as your growth, right? Resources without that control is pretty useless. And so this is things like, do you get to pick what kind of projects you're on? Do you get to move around on teams if you would like to? Do you get a lot of input as to like what kinds of problems you really get to tackle? And how much is your manager micromanaging you versus really giving you the autonomy to solve the problems in the way that you'd like? Right? So this even goes all the way down to culture of that company. Like I really love remote companies, for example, because they give me a lot of autonomy to sort of think about how I spend my time instead of me being strapped to, a seat, from a specific set hours in the day. The other thing that I like looking for is just what my impact is going to be. And this sort of goes to the size of the company that I was talking about before, right? Like how much is what I'm doing actually going to affect the end result, right? If you're at a huge company where you may just be, working on one small feature of, this really huge machine, you may not feel like you have a lot of leverage or impact. But, for example, here at Stack Overflow, my engineering team for the public site is really only 5 developers, and that is a lot of leverage, right? Every single change that you make to the product is going to have an enormous impact on the overall product and the community, right? So that's something else that I'm very attracted to. And very much related to the impact portion is what is the actual mission of the company, right? Impact is about like what is the scale at which you are making that impact, but the mission is like what problem is it that you're solving, right? You can have a lot of impact, but you may not care about the mission, right? So say, for example, like you are maybe the lead developer on this team where you have, every single thing that goes through is something that you have a hand in. But if you don't care about what problem it is that's solving, maybe that's not the best fit for you, right? So for me, I really care a lot about technology education and opportunity. That's what my North Star is. And so Stack Overflow has also fulfilled that sort of role for me a lot as well. So these are the 4 things that I care about when looking at opportunities here. So moving away from sort of like, okay, now you have sort of like what companies you sort of want to work at. They kind of check the boxes when it comes to that list. What are the ways that you can sort of position yourself before you even try to send in your application to make sure that you're the best candidate, for that in that pool? So the first thing, and this is more of a mentality here, is that I really want you to forget your background. And this is especially the case for people that are just starting off with their first opportunity. No one really quite has a traditional path. It doesn't quite exist in my mind. Like, I really want you to really focus more on your skills rather than sort of like whether you got a degree or whether you went through a boot camp or maybe you're self-taught. Each of those paths have their own pros and cons, right? If you talk about folks that are going through a traditional CS program, you may have really strong background in data structures and algorithms, but maybe you haven't seen what it's like to work on a team. And maybe you don't have a lot of experience in web development because they don't have courses in that, right? If you're in a boot camp, maybe you have really great practical skills and you can have a lot of small projects, but you don't have the data structures and algorithms background and you don't know what it's like to work on a project end to start, right? Or start to end. And the same thing goes when you're a self-taught developer. You feel like you know how to build things, you know how to learn things really quickly, and you've built stuff, but you don't feel like you have the academic knowledge, for example. There are pros and cons to all of those things. So just block that stuff out. It'll probably only serve to slow you down. And one last thing here, if you are focusing on your skills, a really great place to start is web development. That's where a lot of the job opportunities are. So if you're like, it's a data science, should I do machine learning? Should I focus on hardware? All that stuff. A really big part of the revolution when it comes to like the industry blowing up has really been surrounding the web. So if you are in doubt about where to focus your skills, web development is a really good place to make sure that you match up with the market. The next thing, regardless of sort of which path you're going through, right? CS, self-taught developer, bootcamp, or some mixture of them, always be building, right? Make side projects, try to get an internship or volunteer to build something, right? The things that you're going to be doing in class are necessary, but not sufficient for what you're going to be doing in the job market, right? So, and the other thing to realize here is that quality is more important than quantity, right? What I would see a lot, especially when I see resumes from folks that are just graduating from a boot camp or graduating from a college experience, is that they have a lot of small projects, but none of them really sort of go deep. And that's going to be a problem for you later on, especially once you get into things like the behavioral interview or even just getting your foot into the door past the resume stage there. We like to see some sort of depth where you can really have a lot of experience working on some pretty interesting problems. And you really get that by focusing on quality of a project rather than the quantity of a project. Another thing that I think is extremely important here is to document and publish almost everything that you are doing. This will only, pay dividends to you later on in the future, right? Even if you're just a student, right? You can, blog about this new algorithm that you learned about. What were the things that you had challenges with? What are the ways that you actually solved that particular problem? Show your work when it comes to open source projects. Like, do a little bit of a side project, hopefully again a deep one, and see how much of it you can actually share. Be on Stack Overflow, ask and answer questions. All of that stuff is a paper trail that, me as a hiring manager, I will always look for, because there's so much more richness and depth that I can get from these things if you document and publish them, right? And all it really takes is just writing down what you're, taking your notes that you have from class, turning that into a blog post, making your source code open, if you're talking about a side project. That's really all we're asking to do. I'm asking you to do here. And the last thing here, especially as you get closer and closer to when you're actually going to be looking for a job, is network, right? Focus on building relationships over time. You're gardening. You're not just sort of like getting a meeting, hopefully that they'll just hand you a job. You're developing a relationship over time so that when there are opportunities that come up, you have that relationship and you can just skip the line essentially, instead of waiting to apply, hoping that you're going to get a call back on that interview. Okay. Ooh, that's the previous one. Okay, so now that we're finished talking about positioning yourself, let's talk about, okay, you actually got, what happens when you actually want to apply to a job, right? You sort of laid all the foundational work from there. What do you do from there? So the first is the actual application itself, right? So you have your list of 10 companies, you've built your relationships, and now you're actually going to submit your cover letter and resume, right? So what are the things that I look for as a hiring manager? There are, I'd say, about 5 or 6 things that I really focus on, especially when it comes to those two pieces, the resume, the cover letter, and all the sort of supporting materials, right? Your blog, your open source projects, all of that stuff that I look for. The first is that your application is targeted. I actually want to see that you want to work at this company, right? And that you're not just copying and pasting a templated letter where you can switch out Stack Overflow for any other company that's out there. And all that really takes is some research, right? Don't think that your cover letter is going to be okay if it's just going to be like a pray and spray sort of situation. Do a little bit of research, reference a blog post, find out what the name of the hiring manager is that you're trying to apply for. That stuff actually does matter. We want to see that you want to work here and that you're not just looking for any kind of job that's out there, right? Next is experience. And understandably, this is going to be a little bit harder when you are in a school setting, but we just want to make sure that this is not the first time that you've coded, right? Especially for an entry-level position. I typically look for about 2 years of full-time coding in the last 5 years or so. And when I say full-time, that doesn't mean professional experience. That again can mean things that you're doing in class, side project, volunteer work, internships. Those are the things that I'm looking for, right? I got my job at Stack Overflow as an engineer without taking any classes, having no internships. But the reason I think I was able to get past this is because I was constantly building side projects that I had evidence for, and some of them that I was able to work pretty deep in and then eventually show for that work, right? The next thing is depth, right? Again, and this sort of goes to what I was saying before about having quality versus quantity here. I want to see that you've done something technically hard, right? Where, maybe you are really interested in low-level C programming, for example. You're really interested in how Node.js works and built a server from the ground up. Like, show me some sort of evidence that you can do something really technically deep. The places that I typically see this are inside of resumes, like maybe in a bullet where you said, this is one thing, one project that I worked in, get into detail a little bit about that. Or even better, and again, this is where that document and publish stuff works a lot, is a technical blog. Tell me about a project that you worked really, really deep in and what were the obstacles that you went through and how do you solve them. Let me see your actual code on GitHub, for example, or an answer on Stack Overflow. Those are the things that I'm looking for with depth. Next is passion. Show me that you can do more than what is just minimally required of you, right? Are you actually passionate about coding? A lot of people think about this in terms of extracurriculars, but this can also be in terms of like what you're doing on the job too, right? Are you just, getting tickets and then actually shipping code, or are you doing more than that, right? Maybe on the job, you are doing some mentorship of like more junior developers that are there. Maybe you're involved in interviewing. Maybe you are involved in like diversity and inclusion efforts at the company. We want to see that you're doing more than just what is minimally required of you. Outside of work, again, Stack Overflow activity, side projects, going to meetups, a blog. Those are things I always check for. And 2 more things that I look for. One is, and the last one here when it comes to the application is gets things done, right? I want to see that you can actually take something from start to finish here, especially if you can lead a project. Can you actually be someone that I give you a task and I know that you're going to go and get that thing done, right? Talking about starting a project or like leading a team, that you're someone that people ask questions of, right? Those are all things that I'm looking for. And the last, and this is less of a evaluative thing, but more of like, what is the kind of thing that you're looking for in an opportunity is, are you looking to be someone that's more of an expert, right? Someone that's going to get really, really deep in your craft. In this case, get really, really, really good at programming, right? Or do you want to get into leadership, right? Do you want to be an empowerer, right? Do you want to go into management, for example? Do you want to lead teams instead? And at some point later down the line, there's going to be a fork in the road where you think about, I want to be an expert, right? Become like a principal developer or like a fellow, or maybe you might end up being like a manager or a CTO or something like that, right? What path are you going to be going into? Okay, let's actually move to the interview portions of this. So the first is, behavioral interviews. And the ways that I've talked about this, say that you get the resume, you start getting into the interview sort of session, it's typically split into behavioral or technical interviews, right? At multiple stages. So I'm going to talk about behavioral and technical interviews overall, and these should apply to sort of any stage that you're in inside of that company. So for the behavioral interview, one thing that you should definitely do is just come prepared with one deep project, right? You should know that project in and out. What were the things that you encountered that were hard technically, and what were also the team issues that you encountered as well, right? Having those examples at hand is going to be extremely important so that you're not sort of wondering like, oh, there was this project that, had this particular sort of background that I need to give you and then go into that particular thing. It's almost always better to have one deep project that you can talk about really in depth. And the other thing that most of the behavioral interview is going to be teasing out is what happens with common obstacles. And this usually is about not having enough time, knowledge, or relationships in place, right? So for example, I ask a question sometimes about, you're given a ticket and you have 2 weeks to complete that ticket, but say that you get sick, right? Or maybe someone in your family gets sick and there's no way they're going to be able to finish everything that you have in time. What are you going to do, right? I'm going to give you a task that maybe you have never encountered before. I don't know how to make sure that emails are authentically signed so that they're not marked as spam, but you've never encountered that. What would you do in that scenario, right? Maybe you have a conflict with a particular person and you don't have that relationship in place. How are you going to handle that, right? And I'd say the thing to really focus on in almost every single case here is accountability, right? If you don't have enough time, are you going to raise that with your team? How can you rely on your team to help you finish those things, right? If you don't know something, are you going to do your own research, and are you going to lean on the resources of or the knowledge of folks that are around you, maybe other more senior folks, or maybe the person who assigned that to you, right? If you don't have the relationships in place, how do you make sure that you can communicate that kind of thing, right? How you can take ownership of the things that you are working on and make sure that you're not taking that kind of feedback personally if, say, you're doing a code review, for example, right? Think about what it's like if you don't have enough time, knowledge, or relationships, especially in the context of the project that you're thinking about too. The other thing that I really look out for is sort of self-actualization. Like, what are the things that you want, right? Know what is important to you when it comes to an opportunity. And I typically, I spoke about this earlier when it comes to like people, autonomy, impact, and the mission, right? But there are other ways that you can sort of frame that. You don't have to take the things that I used here. But another great way of thinking about this is people, process, and technology, right? What do you look for when it comes to the people that you're going to be working with and how you interact with them? What is it like when it comes to the processes of that team, right? Do you care about the team being agile, for example, or being more waterfall? Do you care about how you sort of like report vacation hours and all that stuff? And then lastly, of course, what is the technology, right? Are you actually interested in the technical problems that you're going to be working in and day out, right? Do you like the stack? How are things actually working with continuous integration and continuous delivery? Like, are those things in place? We want to see that you actually have opinions about those things and that you're not sort of just like, I can sort of do anything here, right? And the last thing here when it comes to the behavioral interview is really to do your research. Make sure you know the background of the company, right? It absolutely shows, and it's definitely something that I look for every time I go into a behavioral interview. And even the question portion of your interview is sort of part of that, right? I want to know that you know what the company actually does. What are its products? What are its history? What's the latest news that happened? Did they recently raise a round? Was there a leadership change? Was there a new product that they launched? And also do research on your interviewer, right? Chances are you're going to find out the name of the person that you're going to be interviewing with and see if they wrote a blog post, find out more about their background. That stuff always, always, always impresses me when I know that they've done their research, and you can demonstrate a lot of that with the questions that you ask, right? I read this blog post that you guys published about this new product that launched, and I saw that you were one of the key contributors on that. Can you tell me more about that project? Right? Just by asking that question shows a lot of that research that you've done and will always impress an interviewer. All right. This is now probably the part that all of you were thinking about when it comes to landing your first tech job. And this I'm really going to split into two major areas, right? The first is the background when it comes to a technical interview. Like, what are the things that you want to do to prepare? The first is just data structures and algorithms. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this is still the name of the game. Like, I think that this really sort of prioritizes folks that have a traditional computer science background. But even if you don't, there are a lot of resources that are out there that will allow you to pick up the skills that you need, right? So you've probably heard of a lot of these, like LeetCode, Algo Expert, Interviewing.io, Cracking the Coding Interview is a book that's really popular. There are really great resources that are out there for you to learn a lot of these skills and also to practice those skills as well. Even though I would say I've only really thought about data structures and algorithms and implementing them a handful of times the entire time I've ever coded, it's still unfortunately a really big part of the interview process for a lot of companies that are out there, especially for the larger, more established ones that are, in the FANG sort of tier. The next thing that I think a lot of people sort of overlook for technical interview practice is bootcamp prep courses. So you might have heard of boot camps like Hack Reactor or Codesmith or Flatiron School. A lot of these schools actually will have an interview in order for you to enroll in the first place, and they have a lot of material, communities, as well as actual mock interviews that they can give you for not that much money, say about $200. And you can actually get an entire community of the curriculum and actually see what it's like to interview with actual people who are used to interviewing and giving those interviews. And that's a really, really great way to keep yourself accountable if you have a busy schedule, as well as get the content that you need all in one place. Another thing that I'll say too is to know one language really, really well, some sort of general purpose programming language. Most companies do not care which programming language you're sort of coming in with, right? I remember coming into Stack Overflow, which is a C#.NET, pretty standard Microsoft stack. And I was pretty much on every other side of the wars that you can imagine. Like I was using a Mac when they liked PCs and Windows. I was, doing Python on dynamic languages when they really loved C#, which is a static one. I was doing Mongo and NoSQL, and they were very firmly in SQL Server, right? And I was still able to get through. What's important is that you know everything in and out about that language. And I personally really like JavaScript and Python because I think they give you the least trouble when you're thinking about syntax and all the complexities that are going in there. So just know one language well. And then, of course, nothing beats practice, right? Create a study group, try to give each other mock interviews, join a prep course like I mentioned before, or, ask a mentor for help. Hopefully, if you're here, you have a mentor who is technical if you're looking for that. And there's really nothing that replaces a mock interview that's out there. It's a lot like riding a bike, right? You can read all you want about, what it's like to ride a bike, watch videos about riding a bike, but until you actually get on a bike and actually practice, you're never going to get good at it. Okay. Now let's actually talk method when it comes to technical interviews, right? So most technical interviews, if you don't know, what's actually going to happen is that you're going to open up a technical editor of some sort. Maybe you'll be on a whiteboard, or some cases, use something like a Google Doc. That's something that we do at Stack Overflow. And you're going to be given a problem of some sort with some amount of time that you have to actually solve that problem with an interviewer that is going to give you hints or possibly even collaborate with you on that. When most people get problems, especially if you're coming from, a pretty academic background here, your instinct is probably going to be that you're just going to get the problem, read the problem, and then just start coding. Do not do that. That is the wrong thing to do. The thing to remember about the technical interview is that it's not just about solving the problem, it's about how you communicate and show that you're thinking clearly as you are working through the problem, right? And so I sort of have a 4-step method when it comes to how you solve a technical problem, which is that you understand the problem first, plan what your approach is going to be, execute on that plan, and then eventually optimize. You basically never, ever, ever, ever want to just start coding immediately when you're given a problem, right? So say that you're given a problem, okay? The first thing to know is that you understand that problem very, very thoroughly, right? Before you write a single thing down, ask questions. Make sure that you actually understand if there are any edge cases that are involved with that particular problem. Demonstrate your understanding with test cases, right? There's probably going to be an input and an output, right? Come up with your own input, run through the problem and see if the output is going to be right, and confirm that with your interviewer, right? Make sure that it's very, very clear that you understand the problem and that you make it clear that you understand the problem to your interviewer, right? I know so many people that jump into coding immediately, and it's just that they misunderstood the problem and they wasted half of their time on the interview just solving the wrong problem entirely. And they should have just checked to see if their approach was right and their understanding was right. And the next thing, after you actually know that you understand the problem and confirm that with your interviewer, plan out your actual solution, right? And this can be notes and comments in your editor, or it could be pseudocode, really anything that's there. You don't want to be worrying too much about syntax and all that stuff just yet, right? What you're really thinking about is the path that you are taking for this particular problem the right one? A lot of people will try to just go straight into coding from here, but it's too hard to be thinking about how you're going to be solving the problem as well as juggle all the syntaxes and the minutia of coding. There's too much room for error. So split those two, portions out, right? Just think about the plan, do some pseudocode, write some notes, and you can, again, check in with your interview. Does this approach seem right? Do you feel like there's another way that I could be looking into this, right? And then once you have that, then you can get to the third step, which is to execute, right? Now that you have your plan, you understand the problem, all you need to do is translate your approach into code. And you can just focus on how to write good code, right? Is your syntax correct? Did you get your indents right? Did you put the semicolons in all the right places, right? You don't need to be worrying about, did I understand the problem? Am I also, getting the right approach? Am I getting the right, all you need to be focusing on is getting the right solution here. And the thing that's really, really important here is that when I say right here, I'm not talking about, is this the optimal solution? The thing that you really want to be working towards is that this is a solution that will actually solve the requirements at hand, right? Maybe it's the worst space-time complexity that is out there, the most naive solution that is out there, but that's not what you're looking for just yet, right? Just focus on getting the problem right with the right inputs and outputs first. Now, once you've actually written out all that code and you've also proven that the code works, right? Pretend being the debugger, show that it actually works line by line, then you can optimize from there, okay? Handle all the edge cases that you think you might have missed. Refactor your code so that it's more readable, maybe simplified so that you're not repeating yourself. And you can focus on reducing the space and time complexity on those pieces, right? So many people, when they get a problem, they want to jump straight into coding and take all 4 of these steps all at once. It's way too hard. You're going to mess yourself up. So it's best to just split these different stages out so that you can really think about each step thoroughly and get it right each time. Okay. All right. Let's move on from here. Hopefully you get through all the behavioral interviews, all the technical interviews. What happens when you actually get the offer? It's actually not quite over yet until you've actually signed the contract here. And these are just a few tips I want to make sure that you all know, because I really wish I knew these things when I first got my first technical offer. The first is read your entire contract. Read it word for word. I know it's a huge, crazy, sort of intimidated document. It's really important to actually read your entire contract and make sure that you understand it, right? Don't sign anything until you've read your contract and fully understand it, right? Look out, of course, for probably the basic things, right? Salary and benefits are the things that probably jump out to you the most, but also think a lot about, your intellectual property, right? Some companies have clauses that are in those contracts about owning anything that you build during the time of your employment, even if it's outside of work, right? Is that something that you care about? Do you have side projects that you want to make sure are outside of that? And also understanding your stock options, right? This is a very complicated sort of like subject. I could do a whole other talk about stock options and like how that is being navigated, but best thing, talk to a mentor. They can probably give you a lot of the ins and outs of what to look out for in this contract. The next thing is negotiate. You should always, always, always negotiate your offer, right? Just don't leave that stuff on the table, right? Again, this is a candidate's market here. You are in a position where you can actually do that negotiation. So don't believe that you can't negotiate or that they'll be afraid, or be afraid that they'll rescind your offer. If they're going to do that, chances are it's probably not a great company to go work for. That's a huge red flag if for some reason they sort of just shut that down. And it never hurts to ask. The worst that happens is that they just say no. The upside of that is you might get a pretty a bump in your salary or other benefits or something else like that. So always, always negotiate. Also on that vein, if you can manage it, have more than one offer at a time. That gives you an enormous amount of leverage when you're negotiating, where you say, hey, Google, Facebook has another offer here and they're offering me X, Y, and Z. What can you do that? And eventually it becomes this really interesting sort of like back and forth where it's like these two companies are fighting for you. That's the best position to sort of be in. And then the last thing, and again, this goes back to what I said before, where it's really a candidate's market. Do not settle. Okay. It is very, very tempting to sort of fall into this trap where it's like, oh, I got this offer and I have this very interesting opportunity, but it's not everything that I was looking for. You don't need to fall for that trap, right? There are plenty of opportunities that are out there. And again, remember, it's a candidate's market here. Don't just settle for the very first thing that someone gives you. You can negotiate. You can try to get more leverage. You can go to other companies. Just remember that when you're going through this. Okay, I know that I've been talking for like 40 minutes now, so I'm going to try to get through this last portion as quickly as I can, but I think it's important as well. I said that I also would cover diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is particularly important to me, so I'm going to try to get through this and hit the major points here. So the first thing is, something that I sort of call the gold rush. Like, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to me? That's what DEI stands for. When you think about what is happening with technology, this is a sort of unprecedented opportunity for basically everybody that is in this industry, right? Technology is, you might have heard this term that software is eating the world, that technology is basically taking over basically every industry that is out there. And there's enormous economic opportunity that is involved in this, and that with that comes a lot of other things that are baked into that. And if you take a look at sort of what has happened over the course of history, when there are these really big gold rushes or revolutions where there's a lot of economic opportunity, people who are underrepresented in tech, people who have historically been left behind when it comes to these things, we're at risk of leaving those people behind again, right? And the way that we prevent that is by thinking a lot about what diversity, equity, and inclusion means when it comes to getting people into the door and thriving inside of the industry. So that's why it's particularly important to me. That's why I work at Stack Overflow, and I think a lot about that. If I can make, this one experience of people coming to our site every day where, they may get a negative experience because someone is gatekeeping, or say like, why are you even programming? That stuff can turn off a lot of people that already have insecurities, especially folks that are underrepresented, to coming into this industry, right? So I think that there is an amazing opportunity to lift an entire generation of folks that have historically been left behind and bring them into a completely new place here. So that's why this is particularly important to me. One way I think that it's really helpful to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot of different topics to cover here, but one way to really think about how to navigate, like, what's a good litmus test for, is this a good place for me when it comes to these aspects around diversity, equity, and inclusion, is, do you feel like you can bring something called your authentic self to work, right? To bring your whole self to work. A lot of you may have heard these terms where, like, or these phrases where, like, oh, we don't really think that much about race, or think a lot about sort of like somebody's gender when they're here in the workplace. We just care about the work. It's a meritocracy, right? But I think that's actually the wrong way to be thinking about this, and it's because of this concept of an authentic self. For me, I'm an Asian man. I am also out. I am gay. I love playing video games. I love cooking. That is what my authentic self is, right? It's all of those aspects. And when I come into work, I want to be able to bring all of those different parts of myself to work, right? I don't want to have to hide the fact that I am an out gay man, for example. I don't want to have to hide that I love playing video games at work, right? Is the environment that you're going into when it comes to this company allowing you to bring your authentic self and actually encourage that you bring your whole self to work, right? That's what it means to have a place that is truly valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's one way to be thinking about this. So when you think about all the different things that make up you, right? You're not just your race. You are not just your gender. You are not just what code you put out there. How do you bring your whole self to work? And is this the place that will openly embrace that, right? Now, another thing that on the flip side, right? Like, so, that's what you're looking for. That's sort of like, you want to be able to bring your whole self. The other part of this is like, what do you want to sort of avoid here? And I've talked a little bit about this when we first had our introductions, which is around imposter syndrome. When you think about folks that are traditionally underrepresented inside of tech, a really big part of that is having a lot of doubts about whether or not you are being whether you belong or whether you are going to be othered inside of that place, right? And it really feeds on this insecurity about, do I actually belong here? Now, something that I think I find, really comforting about engineering and in tech is that there's kind of a not so big secret about how engineering works, which is that everybody's kind of just figuring it out, right? Everyone's kind of in a maze in the dark together here. For when you're, say, given a problem, for example, when it comes to coding, you are given this problem. You may not necessarily know exactly what the solution is out of the box, but you are confident that you're actually going to get through that. It's a lot like walking into a maze in the dark. You don't know necessarily what the path through that maze is going to be, but you're going to feel your way through and eventually get yourself out of there, right? It's so much more about the confidence that you're going to be able to figure out that solution and not just know what that thing is out of the gate, right? Now, how is that related to imposter syndrome, right? Again, it's about this faith, this confidence that you're going to be able to figure out a particular solution, even if you don't know what that is right out of the gate. The thing about more senior developers and other folks that are in this is that they're just more confident that they can actually get through that unknown and then figure out what that solution is, even if they don't know it from the very beginning, right? When this is related to DEI is this a place that is going to help build up that confidence or tear it down, right? Does it feed into your imposter syndrome or not, right? When you are thinking about code reviews, for example, if somebody is communicating to you in a way that is demeaning, it diminishes your confidence in whether or not you actually belong in a place or not, right? It should be doing exactly the opposite, right? So think about imposter syndrome, how that's related to DEI, whether or not it actually feeds into your insecurities, and whether or not it gives you confidence that you can actually walk through a maze in the dark, because actually that's what everybody here is doing. That's not such a big secret from there. And a few more points here when it comes to what I keep in mind when it comes to choosing a company. First thing that I look for is people. What does the leadership look like? Does it look like the kind of leadership team that seems diverse, that is inclusive, that thinks about equity, right? Is all of your leadership team white, cis, straight men, for example? That should be assigned to you. Does it have the kind of leadership that you would want mentorship from, right? Who would your manager be? What does your team look like, right? How do they interact with each other? Those are things to be looking out for. The second is, resources. What resources are available to you that are specifically there to cater to people of certain communities, right? Are there affinity groups or employee resource groups where you can bring people together of a certain background? Like, I am the head of the Asian Pacific Islander affinity group at my company. I'm also part of the leadership of the LGBTQ affinity group that's there. Are there resources that are out there? Mentorship, affinity groups, any sort of support groups, things like that that the company can offer you. And outside of those two things, right, and this is related to, where is the company putting their money and time into these actual efforts, right? A lot of people will give lip service to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Especially given the political climate that we're in right now. Well, they'll change their logo to be a rainbow, or they will put out a statement around that. But unless they're actually putting their money and their time, and that's really where the value is, that's when you know that they're actually, investing real resources towards a problem that they believe in, right? Look for where the money is going and look for where the time is going, right? Did they write a blog post about how they volunteer to help underrepresented communities in your local community to get better opportunities for technology, right? Did they donate money to a particular organization that you find, particularly appealing when it comes to these values? Those are the things that you could be looking out for. And again, I will say this again over and over, do not settle. There is absolutely nothing that should allow you to compromise your dignity and self-respect, especially when it comes to your authentic self, right? It doesn't matter what they're offering. It's just not worth demeaning yourself for a paycheck or some sort of impact here. Again, this is a candidate's market. It's your market. There are other opportunities that are out there. Okay, those are all the slides that I had. I think we have about 15, 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So any questions that y'all have, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Yes, Sarai, go ahead.
Hi, John. I feel like this was so good that I'm gonna have many questions anyway, because it was just so thorough. But one thing I was wondering, that when it comes to like going for projects and things like that, well, I know my mentor, shout out to Brad, was telling me that like just starting a project is better than like, just stalling and just thinking about starting a project. But I was just wondering, I'm sometimes trying to wonder, like, is it good to go for the idea that I'm more so passionate about, or like something else that's more so technically difficult that can be more, I guess, attractive on a resume, or maybe like a combination of both? I don't know.
I think that I would start something that you're passionate about. I mean, the reason being is, I'm assuming that you're a programmer and you're looking for something that you're going to be looking for an engineering job of some sort. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I say something passionate is because that way you'll continue working on it, and that you'll actually continue learning about it. Like, and that's why I was saying sort of like go somewhere deep. Like, I wouldn't do something technically hard just for the sake of it being technically hard. Hopefully, it's something technically hard and that you're passionate about it, right? Because that'll really demonstrate sort of like, one, you have the chops for whatever it is that you're working on, but two, that you'll continually be learning and improving on it, right? The ideal sort of project is one where you actually care about it and you're sort of like, oh, I want to be able to make X feature on this project, and now I need to go figure out how to go build that thing. So you're going to go look on Stack Overflow, or like go through a course where you'll learn that particular technology and use it essentially as like a sandbox for you to find out, how does this technology work? Can I build something that I can actually show for it, and then eventually be able to talk about it in, say, an interview, right? That's, I think, the ideal kind of project that you're looking for. A really, really good one that I basically recommend it to everybody is like build a personal site, right? Like build a blog. Like that's a really straightforward way to like, establish what your personal identity is going to be, right? Give you a project that's a pretty full stack kind of project. Like don't just take a Squarespace CMS or something like that and just tack onto it. Try to build it from scratch. That'll actually flex a lot of the different muscles that you'll need, especially if you're thinking about becoming a full stack developer.
Awesome. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions, but I had a second one. If
Yeah.
that's okay. So part of my interest too with like coding and such, I'm interested in traveling as well and working around and maybe finding a job that lets me do that. But I know with like time zone differences and maybe like having the resources to have a kind of like nomadic lifestyle and such. Like I don't know if you have any tips or like any insights to that as well.
Yeah, actually, so I didn't mention this earlier, but I was actually also nomadic when I've been here at Stack Overflow. So I spent about 2 or 3 years traveling while I was working full time as an engineer. The first absolutely is how much of a remote work culture is it? Like that's the number one thing to be looking out for, right? And it's not enough for it to be like, oh, like we use video calls and Zoom and like we're good to go, right? There are so many other cultural things about that company that you want to be looking out for too, right? And I'd say the number one thing is like, how much do they care about like what your results are versus how you actually do your work, right? You can sort of put companies on a spectrum when it comes to their culture about like, hey, this is the kind of place that really cares that I clock in at 9 o'clock, I'm there for my daily Scrum meeting, and then, I'm going to be part of all these ceremonies to be finished at like, 5 p.m. And that's just how it's going to be. Versus a company that might be more like, here are your tickets. I don't really care how you go about doing this. I just want you to get those things done. And then everything else sort of doesn't matter, right? At Stack Overflow, for example, it's much more the latter than is the former. And that's the kind of culture that you're really looking for, right? How much do they really sort of focus on results versus say the process at which you actually get to those results? The really fortunate thing, sort of like, if there is any silver lining to the whole pandemic situation that we're in right now is that a ton of companies are moving into remote, right? Before I'd say, there were maybe a handful of companies that really fully embraced remote, Stack Overflow being one of them. Automatic, for example, GitHub was also pretty well remote. There's a lot of companies that are doing that. So what I'm hoping is that this will, by the time that you are, really getting onto your search, is that more and more of these companies will adopt a culture such that it doesn't matter geographically where you are, right? And if anything, COVID and the whole pandemic situation has sort of softened companies into thinking more this way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
If you ever want more tips on like nomadic traveling and all of that stuff, I could do a whole other talk on that and like how to prepare and what I was like down to like how I was packing and managing my schedule. So if you ever want to talk about it, I'm more than happy to.
Yes, please. I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Yeah, so I just want to say like thank you so much, John, for doing this whole entire talk. And it's just super, as Sarai just said, it's like super useful, lots of detail. And also we have a couple mentors in here. So if like any of you guys have any input you want to give on any of the questions, like feel free. Like just like keep it like, I guess we can like make sure it's like a discussion. But I guess one of the questions I had a lot, but one of the major ones that like kind of kept recurring to me was like, let's say you're getting your first internship. And like usually your first internship isn't usually the best kind, right? And I feel like it's pretty common for a lot of people to settle with their first internship. Like how do you think go about that? Because I know like a big thing was like not to settle and like know your worth. But like it seems like a lot of times your first job or first internship you're kind of settling in a way.
There's always a balance to strike, right? I mean, you certainly, I say don't settle because I want you to get what you're worth, but it's also a question of, do you actually know what you are worth, right? Like, I think that's a really big part of the equation that a lot of people don't know. And like, it can feel like an asymmetric sort of market, right? Like it feels like companies are sort of holding all that power, all that. And a really great way of understanding this is finding a mentor, right? Somebody that will actually be able to evaluate your skills and sort of be like, why are you taking this shit internship? Don't go and do that. You deserve better than that, right? Doing that on your own is going to be really, really difficult because you kind of don't know what you don't know, especially when you're really, really early in your career, right? Like you don't even know if like these are the 6 technologies that are really going to help me get that job at Google or something like that. Having somebody that's a bit more experienced that can actually, evaluate what you're like, know what your skills are, can tell you a lot of like, are you actually settling or not? It's kind of too hard to know that without just getting an offer and being like, well, is this a good fit for me or not? It's a diff really between what the opportunity is in front of you and what your actual worth is. And without knowing what that worth is and getting really solid on that, there's sort of no way of knowing, right? So my advice to you is find a mentor, really get somebody that can be honest with you, and hopefully push you to not settle, especially if they think they're going to take a shit internship or opportunity, right?
Right. That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no other questions, I have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I was so kind of like referencing the beginning of what you were talking about with the recruiting process, like like how often do you think people should just be writing cover letters in general? Because just like in general, do a lot of companies read them? And also like your blogs and like your, I guess, GitHub profile, do you find that a lot of other people read them as well?
I mean, I would say that pretty much every engineering manager that I've ever sort of run into, or somebody who's a hiring manager, will, if there's a website that you put on there, a GitHub, a Stack Overflow, anything like that, it's very, very rare that I'll sort of go to any sort of competent hiring manager and they won't dig beyond their CV and cover letter, right? There are some places that really just don't care about cover letters. I certainly do. But the other thing that you should know is that it's really like, what I don't want you to do is sort of be like, I'm going to write a custom cover letter, down to every single sentence for every single company that's out there. There's still a level at which you can certainly templatize it, but you will be shocked how many cover letters I get, which is just a straight copy and paste of Stack Overflow, even just putting a single line, which is that like, I love Stack Overflow because the way that it helps with my questions and answers and got me through my computer science degree, that is enough to show me that you care about this place, right? Most people, will just copy and paste a template and then switch out the name, or sometimes won't even switch out the company name. And I know that they really just don't give 2 shits about working here, right? It's not much more. The bar is so low when it comes to things like cover letters. For the other sort of like pieces when it comes to blogs and GitHubs, I definitely look at those things. Again, that's usually a really one of the only sources that I can look for things like technical depth, for example, right? When you have a resume that has a pretty long history, chances are you're only maybe putting like 2 or 3 bullets for each, position that you were in. And very rarely can you sort of get to the level of depth that you can in sort of like 2 sentences, right? Unless you're really getting very technical with your jargon. And a lot of people might even gloss over that kind of stuff. So having code out there, having some kind of content that shows your depth is almost always a beneficial thing to have.
I wish I could add something, but John, you've been just nailing every single thing.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks, appreciate it.
Out of curiosity, you can be like blunt as you wish. I know like with some other jobs, they'll be like, oh, when they're recruiting, they might say, oh, we're interested in seeing our candidates as like a person, their interests, even beyond like tech. But in your mind, are you just more so focused on like their tech profile, their skills? Like, is that really all you want to hear about, basically?
Right. That's a good question. And I think that this will depend company to company. But, speaking about what I think is an ideal company for you is one that, again, going back to this wasn't necessarily a diversity and inclusion sort of like piece here, but like, is this a place that you can bring your whole authentic self, right? Like if you really love something that has absolutely nothing to do with the technology, hopefully it's a company that has a culture of embracing that kind of thing, right? And so if you want to be at a company that, isn't just about all the code that you have, and I think that you should be, then yeah, talk about those things. And again, like this is so much about like the document and published portion of this too, is that hopefully, you know, it's not just the technical stuff that you're putting on like a website or, you know, your blog or whatever it is, but it actually shows that you're a whole real person, right? Those are things that I actually also look for. And something that's really that I think a lot of people don't really talk about is that there's sort of this misconception that like coding is all about just the code, right? If it was just about coding, then I would sort of lock you inside of a room, give you a problem, and then just wait for you to give me back the finished code, right? But the thing is that your coding is really a very social and very human sort of thing to be doing. Like there's this phrase that we say at Stack Overflow sometimes, which is about human-centered engineering, right? Nothing that is built out there right now is done alone, right? So if you don't show that you have interests outside of, you know, what your technical stuff is, that you don't really like talking to people or working on teams, those are really big red flags in my mind, right? Because you're going to inevitably, like, you're going to walk into your day one as an engineer and like, you're going to be working inside of a code base and you have absolutely no idea what any of this shit means. And you're going to have to go talk to somebody to learn what you're going to be doing. You're going to be writing code, and then you're going to have a code review at some point, and you need to be able to work with that person as well. Anything that sort of shows like what you are as a human, that you have those values, that you can work on a team, that you're not just like a lone wolf that only cares about code and has nothing else to do other than code. That's actually a red flag in my mind, right? And if anything, it's usually used as an excuse to be kind of an asshole to other people too. So show your whole self, be your authentic self, and don't be so afraid of that. If for some reason they're sort of like, I don't like this particular part of you because you do some volunteering, or they're not going to be able to, you know, devote yourself completely to just churning out code, chances are it may not be the best culture for you anyways. So I wouldn't be so worried about that in that way.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
No, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
One thing I would add to that is I think when you do sort of behavioral interviews, you might get asked questions about, I don't know, things you've done in the past or like different situations you've been in. And if you can talk to like examples where you like they tie in with yourself and like your interests and your passion, and you like show that, I think people will remember you a lot more than if you just kind of gloss over things quickly. So like showing passion outside of just like the job and what it is, like in some form, will I think probably make people remember you, and they'll feel more confident about you like as an employee and a person.
Thank you.
If there's no more questions, I also wanted to, I know it's like a little bit over 7, but
yeah, it's fine.
I was also just wanted to ask you guys, just the whole group in general. So just how the mentorship program is going. If you guys have any feedback or any problems that you're having, or like just anything you want out of the mentorship program, like now would be a good time. Like we can just discuss it, or if at any point you can always just email me and then we can discuss it from there. But yeah, so like how is everyone? Are you guys like meeting like once a week and stuff like that?
Yeah, sorry. My mentor is Jeremiah, so but we haven't met yet, but it's like kind of difficult to find, I guess, like a time where everyone can meet, you know, because it's midterms week. But yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting with my mentor and, you know, I guess getting more insight into what I guess I could be asking, or any sort of questions that I may have.
Yeah, I think during midterms, it's really hard to get everyone together. Even with this event, I know like there's like 11 or so yeses, but not everyone showed up. And honestly, they're like high key missing out. But yeah, but what was I gonna say? And in terms of like mentorship community events, I know Brad, you said that you wanted to do art tech in the future. Do you think you're still down for that kind of thing?
Hell yeah, I'm down for that. I don't know. Yeah, I could do whatever. I know Saray and I are going to work on doing like Jekyll sites, like personal site tomorrow. And that could be something that we could do just because it's really easy to get like something pretty basic set up and kind of get a good, like getting your toes wet with web development, which I like.
Right.
So yeah, I could do either. We can, yeah, email me. Definitely. I'm down.
Okay. Sounds good.
But I'm to add to the question from before, I'm having a great time. Saray and I and Caleb doing good. Met last week, and then yeah, it's just fun. It's just
That's great.
Yeah.
I was thinking of actually making an event where it's just not, it's like no one's presenting. We're just like having a good time, just chilling. But I feel like a lot of people are really busy, so it might be hard to find a time for that. But maybe we could do that like once stuff starts like dying down or something like that. But
yeah, I'd love like a social event of some sort, like just to get to know everybody, like not necessarily having an agenda or like, or at least some portion of that, right? Like I know that a lot of people, like I've been playing Among Us games with other people like on my team, and then like it's an excuse to get everybody together, but you spend the other half of it just chilling and talking. Like that's always a good thing I'd like to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be
It's really
down.
good
That sounds
idea.
fun. I haven't really played any sort of like meetup games like that before, so I'm down.
Oh, it's so much fun. Okay, that sounds good. Okay. We'll try to schedule that in like the coming weeks. Okay, cool that there's good reception to this. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions for John, feel free as well.
Yeah. And by the way, if any of you, anybody that's here or anyone that sort of like is in the program wants to reach out and talk more about, like I threw a ton of stuff at you guys, but almost any of those topics or slides, I can probably do an entire other talk about too. Like negotiating your offer, or like, any of the points I talked about with diversity and inclusion, or like what it means to actually like document and publish all your stuff. Like, I'm more than happy to go in depth on any of those pieces.
All right, sounds good. Well, it is getting pretty late, so I guess we can start wrapping up this meeting. So thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you a lot to John for coming up with this such great and information-rich presentation. And thank you to our mentors as well, chiming in and showing support for fellow community events. And yeah, thank you to the mentees as well for coming. I know it's a really busy time, but yeah, so yeah, I guess that marks the end of our meeting. Yeah, so hope everyone has a good week and see you guys in the next one.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
John.